I'm good. I'm sorry I was having some technical issues.
Oh, no worries, no worries.
It's not the best reception where I am, but
Oh, I see.
I'm
Okay. Uh, yeah, I hope I'm not keeping you away from such a beautiful day.
Oh no, I appreciate your interest. Thank you.
No, thank you. Actually, I will be recording the whole interview so that I can type it down. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Oh, I'm getting an echo though. I
Oh,
might have to call you back. Oh,
okay. Yeah.
well, wait, I'm not getting that now.
Oh,
So, okay, it seems like it's working okay.
okay, that's great. Um, should we just jump into the interview?
Yeah, I like the subject matter. In fact, I had wanted to make a video on my YouTube channel for a while about, well, I don't know the extent of the subject matter, but that's really one of the reasons I agreed to this because I felt that it was pertinent to things that I like to talk about. So,
Right.
it's good. It's not
Yeah.
all about the paranormal and ghosts and ghoulies. It's sort of also about what it means to society and
Right.
and
Yeah.
what the value is.
Hmm.
Um, it's I'm constantly the interface with that, constantly. So I'm right with you right there. That you would even be thinking about that is remarkable to me, let alone in New York, because people just don't care about that in New York, quite frankly. They just don't. They're kind of cynical. So I
Yeah. Yeah.
appreciate anyone who thinks that way or has that approach, you
Right.
know?
Right. I think you know, scientifically, our society has come a long way. So I think a lot of people um are skeptical about psychics and all that, but we wanted to know
Yes.
exactly like the contributions of psychics because obviously people still go to you and still go to psychics for advice, and we wanted to know you know what exactly you guys bring to for your clients. And
Hmm.
yeah, and I know some people have just love psychics and they've gotten so much and they've benefited so much from it, so we wanted to just research on that. So yeah.
Well, that's sorry, I'm getting echo a little bit.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if I should call you back or not, or if it'll just go away on its own. But yeah, that's okay. That just went away. um, there's a problem with that as well. There are people who get addicted to psychics, just like they get addicted to anything else, and they're using it as a process addiction,
Oh,
which is just a substitute for drugs or alcohol or sex, or well, sex is a process addiction technically, but just anything that's not a substance they use as they don't want to look at themselves. Really, it's weird because you'd think if they came to me, they would want to look at themselves. You'd be amazed how many people I turn away because they just want what they want, and it's really selfish and quite frankly childish what they want. I want a husband. I want a baby now,
oh,
now, and they don't want to look at reality because they think if they're going to a psychic, then it's magical thinking, and magically somehow I can do some kind of spell. I don't do spells. I think spells are kind of juvenile too, um, and passive aggressive. I think they're very passive aggressive. I use a lot of psychological terms, if you might have noticed, because I don't see the difference. I don't see the difference between people coming to me and people coming to a therapist. It's just people who come to me usually have trepidation about therapy, or they come to me as sort of a last route of options. And the people who really love psychics, it's kind of frustrating because they tend to turn the critical thinking off, and they also don't in a way want to examine themselves sometimes. So to try and find that middle of the road client is a gold mine. I'm always excited when I see somebody who's like not emotionally attached to everything that I say. They don't have to accept everything I say lock, stock, and barrel. But also people who are just like firmly, like they come to me with their arms crossed and they just are like, prove it, prove it, prove it. And I'm like, what do you want? I'm not a lotto ticket. I'm not, there was this chicken in Chinatown that used to be able to peck out had this uncanny ability of pecking out like who was going to win the presidency, who was going to win the Super Bowl. I'm like, I'm not the chicken in Chinatown. It's not like that. So it's kind of dehumanizing when you get clients like that as well. Either way, it's kind of dehumanizing because the expectations are so high on both levels. You can't possibly produce for somebody who has such magical ideas about who I am and what I am, because they're going off of the cultural idea of what it is to be a psychic, which is so, forgive me, I don't mean to sound politically incorrect, but they just seem like children. You know, it's like a very childish idea of what Hollywood and culture and folklore have told you what a psychic is, and who. It's never who a psychic is, it's what we are. We're symbols. We're never human beings. We're never seen as like that. We're archetypes. We're superheroes. We're used in the most extraordinary things. And it's just, I'm trying to bring it down to earth. Half of my job is struggling, literally like arm wrestling with my clients psychologically, to get them to realistically respond to what I'm saying. Now, the problem is, however, is when I do see past lives and I do see energetically what's going on with them, and I do a medical scan and I see the stress and the childhood trauma, and I do see, without them saying a word, I don't know who they are, I'm not Google searching them before a session, I'm not Facebooking them, I don't know. I deliberately stay away from that kind of stuff before a session. And when I do readings for famous people, it's even more annoying because everybody knows everything about this person. And even the famous people are skeptical with me because they're like, tell me something I don't know. I'm like, why are you doing this reading with me? Like, they just want to, there's sort of like I hate to say it, like, because I'm friends with some of these people, but there is kind of like a narcissistic thing of like, oh yeah, I know that because I went to 6 other psychics who told, and I already knew this. And I'm like, why are you sitting here with me then? Is this like bingo for you or a board game? Because that's not what it is for me. I take it very seriously. I see it more as self-help and more as a form of an alternative modality to therapy, but it's extremely similar sometimes because I have been in therapy as well. And the methodology that I use is much quicker, much more intense than most people do in therapy, because a lot of therapists are bad. A lot of therapists suck, quite frankly, and they're just bad. And they've gotten bad advice because the therapists are bad, just like there's bad doctors and bad psychics. There's tons of bad psychics who are frauds, but people tend to cherry pick with psychics. They tend to think we're all frauds and we're all scandalous and we're all evil and we're all part of the devil and we're all communing with, oh, it's so hard dealing with the religious clients too, because their religions literally tell them that what I do is against God, which is hilarious because what I do has nothing to do with religion, but that gets confounded with religion as well as either evil or good. You're either a prophet or you're a sinner cohorting with the devil. So there's all of these loaded archetypes and symbols and powerful, powerful, powerful psychological blocks that people have that come up, and boogeymen, nightmarish ideas or savior angelic things that are just not related to what I do at all. It's just so far removed from reality. It has nothing to do with that. Now, I know there are tons of psychics who do love to play up to that, and a lot of them have personality disorders, and they're mentally ill. I mean, there's a lot of people who claim they are speaking to angels and dealing with aliens and UFOs and stuff, and they are what I would call probably people with a personality disorder. And those are the people that a lot of seekers latch onto for dear life and turn them into cult leaders and make them something they're not. And I refuse that. I've refused that for as long as I've been in business, and people kind of seem to get bummed out about that. They seem to resent that. So it's so loaded. It's like a landmine when you talk about what is the cultural idea of psychics. It's such a loaded theology. It's practically at the level of a theology. So thank you for even bringing the topic up once again to come full circle.
So something that I actually wanted to ask you is how and when you knew that you were a psychic. Was it like a natural thing?
It was a progression of experiences. Oh, I'm getting echo again. Sorry. Skype is being a little feisty today. If you could hear me. Okay, it stopped. You know, my mother and I were very telepathic, for lack of a better term. And they've done studies on telepathy. It's real. It's been proven in double-blind, peer-reviewed studies for years. It just doesn't get a lot of press. But one of the things they found was that if you have a deep emotional bond with someone, It is very easy to do thought to thought transference. And so there was a period of time, especially when I was in college, there was a period of time, I remember my junior year in college, I would pick up the phone to call my mother. This is before cell phones. I'm really dating myself here, but when we had like analog phones with handles that you had to pick up and they were chained to the wall. But I would pick up the phone and call my mother, and she would, the phone wouldn't have dialed, and she would be about to call me at the same time. This happened about 16 times over the course of a year. And there might have been like some denial going on there because my mother was a psychologist and she was deeply intuitive herself. And there was a period of time in the 70s when I was growing up where she was involved with tarot cards, and she did go to a psychic once. She took me to this old lady in Kentucky, and I sat on the front porch, and I grew up in Appalachia and in southern Ohio, and there wasn't a lot of talk of this. There was no discussion. It was a lot of old time religion, but not a lot of this. And this woman told my mom everything, and she scared the hell out of me. I had no inkling at that time that I was psychic. I just was told that she knows things without people telling them, and I was quaking in my boots, and she came up to me and gave me a cookie and said, "You're a good girl. Don't worry. You're a good girl." And I was like, it was not a positive, like, oh, I want to be a psychic kind of thing. It terrified me, you know? And I think she knew that I was scared, and that was my only interaction with psychics before I really fully came into my own. And I had no inclination towards it. And when the 80s came, when Reagan came into power, my mom kind of tossed all that stuff in the trash and said, "We don't do that anymore. That was mommy experimenting with stuff, but we don't do that." I mean, she literally sat me down once and said, don't talk about that. Because she's a professional and she was a psychologist, and you know, it was the 70s and people were open to trying all kinds of stuff then. But when the 80s came magically, and it was all about, you know, power suits and self-help books and Wayne Dyer and Oprah Winfrey, and suddenly psychic anything was just kind of like this relic of the hippie era, and so I just was kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. Except when I was in third grade, I would go to the library after school and specifically seek out all the paranormal things I could. I don't know why, it just fascinated me. And I would try and have seances with my girlfriends, and I would always initiate this, and I didn't know why. I just always had this fascination with ghosts and things like that. And I don't think it was from that experience with the psychic and the holler in Kentucky. I think it was something else, because I had no inclination towards that. I didn't pursue that afterwards. You know, I didn't become obsessed with psychic anything afterwards. I went back to being a little girl and playing with dolls, and it was so mundane, you know. And then around age 8, 9, 10, things changed, and I just started, and it wasn't even like there were paranormal references on TV like they are now. I mean, there was a sci-fi element, like the first Battlestar Galactica was on, and of course Star Wars was big, and Star Trek was but that wasn't really overtly psychic stuff. I mean, yeah, you talk about the Jedi warriors, and yes, now you realize they're full-on psychic in the traditional and mythological sense of the word, but really the formation of who I became started happening when I lived in the issue was kind of forced when I was in college. And I lived in a haunted house. And I think it stimulated my third eye somewhat. I think the energy field or whatever it was. I mean, we're talking on a level of 1 to 10, 10 being very haunted, the most haunted you can think of. This was an 11. And we're talking full on people in the hallway who weren't there walking up and down. And it was like a party, like in The Shining, like where you hear a party and the wife in The Shining, sees people in party clothes walking down the hall. I mean, it was literally like that. And then you'd open the door and it'd be silence. And my other roommates would be experiencing that as well. I had one roommate walk into her bedroom and there was a lady in a full Victorian outfit who turned around and smiled. No, she was good. She was a good ghost. Okay. She was nice. And then I had a guy made out of blue light try to kill me. And that's when, yeah, and there was a spiritual element to it. And I called out, I'm not religious. I'm not even Christian. I just said, "Oh, Jesus," like as an exclamation. "Oh, Jesus Christ." Probably is the bad term, you know, in that time. And I felt a presence, like warmth, like good, a good feeling of this, this thing stopped it. It stopped this thing trying to kill me. So at that point, I think my third eye was fully open. There were a ton of other things that happened that were really weird and over the years. And it was all like spaced out though over decades. So you could rationalize it and you could, I don't come from that. I come from a bunch of secular atheist academics who, and lawyers and doctors in my family. None of this was something that was encouraged or talked about. There was no referencing for it. It was just, if you were to bring up the subject beyond, say, the play Hamlet, or, in a literary terminology, Heathcliff and his ghost, Kathy, as a metaphor. If you brought it up in any other context other than as a metaphor, you would be literally looked at like you were strange, crazy. And I just kept it quiet because my mom was a psychologist. I thought I was going to be involuntarily institutionalized if I brought this up. So I just kept it quiet. And we actually made a pact, me and my roommates in this haunted house, to not talk to anyone about it. And I actually made the mistake of telling the girl who took over my room after I left, oh, that room was haunted, but I cleaned it out. It's fine now. And I don't know why, but after I fought this ghost off that tried to kill me, the house quieted down a lot and nothing ever happened again. And I just kind of laughingly told her that she never spoke to me again. So the social ostracization and the message was very loud and clear. And mostly this was from liberal, socialist, communist leaning, or liberal left Democrat leaning people who are academics, atheists, scientifically minded, rationally minded people. They couldn't even entertain for even the tiniest, very like materialist, 3D empiricist, if I can't put it in a scientific instrument and tamp it down and control it, it's not real. And so for me to have these things swirling all around me for my entire adult life and most of my childhood, and not be able to talk about it with anyone other than like religious people. And I'm not affiliated with the spiritualist church. I'm a medium as well as a psychic, but I can't stand the spiritualists. I think they're pretentious. I'm against dogma. I'm not a Thelemite. I'm not a Wiccan. I think all that stuff is just hogwash. I have nothing to do with it. And I'm sorry if that offends anyone, of any of those particular bents, but I think that's just more a bunch of white men in charge creating dogma and creating thought processes that everybody has to follow and creating OCD mindless ritual that has nothing to do with speaking to the dead or communing with dimensions or healing or finding enlightenment or finding meaning. It has no philosophical bent. They've mostly ripped off ancient cults. When I say cult, I mean all religions are cults. That's what they were originally called. They were cults. So cult of Mary stems from Ishtar and ancient Mesopotamia. I mean, all of these religions were cults in the pagan era. And so pagans get a bad rap as well. But what paganism mostly is just earth-based religions celebrating the seasons and the tides and the moon and the stars and how we're all in sync with that. And so there's so many misunderstandings about paganism as well. If you want to call me anything, yeah, I guess I'd be a de facto pagan just by the fact that I am deeply aware of all of that. And I came to that by myself. And then I found through spirit and through influences of other people talking about things on my own. I didn't, Crowley doesn't have a monopoly on me. Aleister Crowley, like, he gives what I do a bad rap, basically. Thelema doesn't have a monopoly on what I do. Wicca certainly doesn't have a monopoly on what I do. So when they want to call me a witch, I call myself a witch in the same way I call myself a Jew, because I'm not observant, but if the Nazis were still here today, I'd be shoved in an oven just like my family was back in the old country. So it wouldn't change anything. So I'm a Jew, I'm a witch. What else do you want to throw at me? They're labels. They're just silly, they're not silly, but and I don't think organized religion is all bad. But I think the dogma is dangerous and it creates unnecessary fear. I had a woman come to me over the course of a year several times recently who wanted to hire me, but she was terrified because she was Muslim and she was told what I did was forbidden. I mean, she didn't really know what I did, but she just assumed going to a psychic medium automatically means you're consulting with the devil. And she was terrified, but she really wanted help. I knew I could help her, and I was very gentle with her, and I didn't try to push anything, but ultimately she chose not to do it because she was fearful of what her imam would tell her and what society would tell her and what culture would tell her. So that didn't exactly leave me with a good taste in my mouth about Islam and women yet again. I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound anti-Islam either. I love Sufism. I'm actually influenced a lot by the Sufis, and I think it's beautiful, and there's a lot of healing practices that come out of the tradition of Sufism. I think it's wonderful. But then you're talking about other aspects of Islam that are, I think, dangerous for women, dangerous for spirituality, and dangerous for enlightenment. And you can find that in every organized religion. It's mostly a patriarchal aspect of our consciousness that feels a need to control because it can't give birth, can't physically give birth, so they have to control creativity, which comes through the pineal gland, and is controlled. And secret societies have been doing this for years as well. The Masons, the Rosicrucians, and you look at these occult secret societies, and they're all about controlling the divine feminine, the pineal gland. So if you slice open the brain and you see the pineal gland, it looks exactly like the Eye of Horus, which is used a lot as a symbol of the Illuminati or other secret societies. But what they've done is they've inverted the divine, which is the opening to your third eye. So they're trying to control the message as well through spreading fear. The media tries to control it as well because, quite frankly, society does not want the feminine mystical aspect to be unleashed on anyone, because when that happens, you go through a profound transformation. You perceive the world differently, and you don't want to buy stuff so much. You don't become so materialistic. You become more philosophical. You look at things from a different perspective, and that doesn't work for them. That cuts into their bottom line. They want you to look at a very narrow 3D materialist, empiricist, if I can't touch it, see it, feel it, it doesn't exist kind of mentality, because ultimately they're advertising and they want you to buy materialist goods. And they want to substitute philosophy and meaning for materialist goods. So I think, not to be conspiratorial, but I think there's something weird about how much paranormal programming there is on television and in film now, and how that has surpassed what I remember used to be movies about grown-ups, like Kramer versus Kramer, and like movies in the 70s, what was that great movie with Timothy Hutton and Donald Sutherland? Movies like that that Robert Redford directed. Something Everyday People, something, I don't know, it won a bunch of Oscars. But I remember in the 70s and 80s, there were a ton of movies that were humanistic and dealt with real feelings and real people. And now it's total unreality. It's just all ghosts and vampires and the paranormal and supernatural. And there's no reality. It dissociates everyone, takes them completely out of their reality. Now Comic-Cons rule, and you want people to be man children and women children for the rest of their lives. You don't want them to be grown-ups. You want them to be dressing up at superhero costumes and going to, San Diego and hanging out with superheroes, which has no reality and no basis for reality either. It doesn't encourage people to be grown-ups. So you have to walk this line. When you say, I'm a psychic medium, nowadays it's even more loaded because people are so lost in video games and the media and their own little social networking where they've created their own world, and it's like a Sims world and nothing is real. It's all like very self-absorbed, very narcissistic, just very like me. I create my likes. I'm basing my world on a world of likes. And it's just dehumanizing to me. It doesn't create or foster community. It creates and fosters people who are programmed to believe certain things without thinking for themselves. So what I do is incredibly polarizing and incredibly provocative, and it triggers people one way or the other usually. And I'm trying to sort of segue into more of my personal development coaching and calling myself more and more often an intuitive consultant, and I hate that term. But saying I'm a psychic medium has not done me much of a service. It just attracts more grandiosity and more people who are more polarized, rather than saying, well, here's what I do. Your head is metaphorically disconnected from your body because you don't know what you like, who you are. You've never examined yourself. You think emotions are scary. And there may be some trauma attached to that I can peel open and look at and show you. And some of it might be from a past life, but some of it might be from this life. But if it's all there, I can pull it out and show you. But you have to be ready for it, and you have to be a grown-up. And unfortunately, when you're in that position, you're vulnerable, you're probably traumatized, and you probably have a lot of arrested development. So not surprisingly, a lot of my clients who hire me, they transform like that. But the ones who aren't willing to look at that, they scatter. They can't. So fortunately, I have a really strong screening process, and that helps a lot. But initially, before, when I was just starting up my business, it was really hard because I didn't know what the parameters were, and I didn't have any boundaries in that regard as well. So I was over delivering, and people were really petulant and not a good match for me as a client. So now that it took like 3 or 4 years to finally figure out the criteria for who was a good match for me. And I make sure that everybody reads a pre-screening a questionnaire for themselves before hiring me, before pursuing it. And one of the questions is, are you ready? Is it a good time for you emotionally, physically, spiritually, nutritionally? Maybe you need the help of this, that, or other practitioner before you can speak with me. And it really hurts when I have to turn away people who want to speak to the dead relatives, because often they're grieving, they're vulnerable, and I have to tell them, you're not ready yet. And I want to help them, but it's not going to help them to just have a telephone call with their loved ones. What's really happening is a lot of unresolved conflicts are usually coming out in their grief with that person. And really what they need is to have an interface with that issue that's coming up from the grief as a byproduct of, of regret, of all these other psychological things that a lot of times could be solved by a grief counselor. And the reasons for speaking to the dead usually are surprising for people. It's not usually the TV version where some medium standing in a crowd, which I think is a horrible way to do mediumship, by the way. It doesn't solve anything. And there's too many energies all around. You're blending everyone's energies in addition to spirit energy. And it's exploitative. I just don't think that's the way to do it. I think if you're a medium and you're doing stuff, to go into a television studio audience with a bunch of grieving people who are desperate to speak to the dead is just tacky. It's just bad form. There's a better way to do it, but it's much more private. It's not as sexy, and it doesn't work on television so much. So, that's the struggle that I've had as well. I have television companies interested in working with me, and then I talk to them, and I'm like, look, I don't work that way. That's some producer or some network's idea of what a medium is, and I think a lot of them are frauds or bad or irresponsible, and not to trash all psychics everywhere, but a lot of them I don't like, quite frankly, because I think a lot of them are shrewd, but a lot of them are jerks, too, that don't respect the boundaries of people. So, I'm sorry, you want to say something?
So if, you mentioned a lot about how people view psychics today, how the media uses psychics. So how do you think you can kind of change that?
Yes, me, one person against the entire tide of billions of people around the planet who have preconceived perceptions of how psychics, who are the real deal, operate. Because I can't. I serve as a living example. I just do my work, and I don't think about how I'm going to do that other than my personal direct experiences with that, with tons of clueless people in the media who, quite frankly, don't know what they're talking about. They have childish 6-year-old ideas of what this is. And they usually wind up getting consultants and people who are just fame whores, or people who are kind of touched mentally, who don't have a take on it that I do. I mean, I just don't get along with a lot of the media, quite frankly, because so many of them want to whore me out or make me look like I'm this crazy person, or they want to put me in a situation that makes for great TV, but doesn't really solve anything or help anyone. And I'm really all about helping people, helping themselves, and helping them feel safe and happy and succeed in life, It's coaching, really, is what I'm doing. It's just I have a little added condiments that I put on that entree that I know other life coaches don't have. You know, I do healing modalities and stuff that a regular coach would not have. And they have their thing that they're good at, and I have my thing that I have that I know no one else has. I'm unique in that regard. So if people come to me, they have to not be scared of psychic ability. And I spend a good 10 to 15% of the first part of the session just trying to calm people down and walk them down from the ledge, usually. And then I do energy work on them. And then usually what pops out are the issues without them saying a word. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, I'm really good at giving them the question they were going to ask before they asked it. I'm not cold reading them, as people like Darren Brown would say, or skeptics. It's all energy. It's all energy. It's all energy. And there is a quantum basis for it, but that's another discussion entirely. But there is a quantum universe that involves space-time. And as I understood it, and I was trained energetically by me, myself, and my guides, who are non-local entities who've just been around the block a little bit longer than you and I have. I consider them friends. They're people, just like you and me. Some of them might not have 3D bodies like you or I understand it, but many psychics have guides. They call them spirit guides or things of that nature. So they're my guides. They're my buddies. You know, we've been in communication, constant contact for years and years, practically a decade now. I had an awakening experience in 2008 that was extraordinary, and it was sort of like a no turning back moment, whereas prior to that I couldn't command any of this. Now I can command stuff at will.
Wow. So, do you mind sharing a little about the
Sure.
2008?
Well, it gets really woo-woo. I mean, all these things that I'm talking about that I'm trying to downplay, they all happened to me. So it's like, oh, how do I gracefully talk about this without sounding like a whack job?
You don't have to worry about
I talked about it in other interviews, it's fine. But it was supernatural in nature, which is ironic because I'm always trying to like talk people down from the ledge about that and not be histrionic about it. But I had a UFO sighting.
Oh, wow.
In my neighborhood, walking home late one night, and then I walked upstairs just completely blown away to my apartment, and then after that I started having weird dreams and really dramatic synchronicities. What Carl Jung talked about with synchronicities, I don't know if your audience is familiar with the term, but just meaningful coincidences like you wouldn't believe. Just seeing the number 1111 everywhere I went, which I've since learned just in research is that that's a sign of awakening, of psychic awakening, that your pineal gland's being activated or something. Becoming aware of other dimensional frequencies, dimensional realities. I literally would wake up and have a skill and not know how I did it. And I would get what I call downloads from the universe, where I would receive tons of data, just like a computer upgrading software. And my guides told me it was over 7 trillion terabytes of information. More than 7 trillion. 7 trillion. Yeah, I know. I didn't even know what a terabyte was. I had to look it up, and it's a lot. Look it up if you want. A lot. 7 trillion terabytes as of 2010, 2011, 2012. Because it went on and on and on for years. And I got visitations from beings in my room at night. I had the whole 9 yards. It was full awakening. And then maybe 2 or 3 months later, I'm standing in my kitchen doing my dishes. And all of a sudden, I hear this voice in my head very clearly that says, "Come to the corner of the room, child." And I'm like, what? And it was so loving. It was a man's voice, but it was like not an earthly man's voice. I don't know how to describe it. It was like, I don't want to say the voice of God, because again, that gets into dogma and that gets into defining things that I don't really have a definition for. I don't want to lead people on unnecessarily or wrongly, but I did hear this man's voice in my head that said, "Come to the corner of the room, child." And I looked up, I walked over, I'm still wearing my dish gloves, and I'm standing there and I look up and this voice that felt like it was connected to a collective of spirits. I don't know how to describe this exactly, but it felt like it was a voice of one, but many. If that makes any sense. It was a paradox. It was a paradoxical voice I heard in my head. And I'm like, yes. And it said, this male voice said, we have been monitoring you for 300 lifetimes. And each lifetime we asked you, do you want to be a psychic? In this one, the one I'm in right now. And in each one, I don't know if it was consciously they asked this of me in each lifetime or unconsciously, but there was some spiritual way or law or physics manner of physical reality, spiritual reality, dimensional reality, where they would ask me, and it was always of my free will. And I would say yes in every lifetime. So apparently this is something that is not taken lightly. That on some level, you know this is going to happen. And I knew this when I was 7 years old. I knew I was going to be in the spotlight. I don't know why. There was no indicator at all. I was living in Appalachia in the middle of nowhere. And I would tell my mom, I think I told her, and I think I just said, I'm going to be famous. I'm not famous, like I'm not a household name or anything, but I am a public figure. Right. And I am on shows with famous people, and I know a lot of famous, I don't know what that was about. I wasn't seeking that out either. In fact, I wanted the opposite. I didn't want that, as an adult. You know, I had all these weird things happen to me, and the last thing I wanted to do was be put in the spotlight over it. It was kind of a strange thing, and then I had this strange relationship with the media where I would just find myself in these situations where I'm like, how did I do this? I'm in front of a camera yet again. Why am I doing this? But then there were sort of negotiations going on, and a part of me kind of knew, like, there were spiritual rules or laws or things, contracts, if you will, that were worked out for learning purposes. And this makes sense to me. You know, if you believe nothing, if you believe none of what I'm saying, one of the things that I do think makes a lot of sense is that Earth is viewed from a spiritual standpoint, from as I understood it from my guides, as a giant classroom. The whole planet was created as a learning center for souls to learn about perspective. And when you are in a container of a body, a physical trapped container that you can't leave, your physical 3D form, you will learn things from a very unique, specific perspective. And you can learn big things and little things, and it's all good. It all goes into the same stew pot. And then you incarnate, and you incarnate, and so reincarnation was a very real thing for me as I learned it. And I always believed on maybe a subliminal level before I even knew what reincarnation was until I learned about it really in college. It was the first time I really think I heard about reincarnation. I was like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I never questioned that concept. It always came very, very naturally to me. So, I mean, I did question it a little bit, but there's so much evidence with near-death studies and children talking about past lives and names. And, you know, there's no way a 5-year-old kid who remembers being a fighter pilot in World War II and talks about his training unit and the locations, and then it's verified later. How can this kid be, you know, making it up or being coached by his parents or something? You know, there's just so many instances of people talking about reincarnation that make sense to me. So I don't believe that you are your physical form necessarily. You belong to your physical form as part of that contract, but you can leave your body. You can have outer body experiences, and they've proven that as well. That, you know, consciousness studies have proven that you are not your mind, that your mind is exterior to you. It's not interior. It's not something that comes from here. It comes from without. So, and I'm a firm believer in the collective unconscious, which Jung talked a lot about, and he was heavily interested in the paranormal and the occult and the psycho-spiritual element of that and the psychological aspect of spirit. and dreams and dream interpretation and things like that. And I just don't compartmentalize in that regard. And that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. That tends to make, because we're all conditioned to be in this 3D materialist, empiricist world. And when people kind of say, yeah, I'm blending it, I'll blend it. People don't like that. They like their little boxes, you know? So it's hard to deal with that when you don't even think that way. When you have so many experiences that show you, well, this is a lesson. You have learned that lesson. You don't need that lesson anymore. And people want to hang on to that lesson for dear life because it's what defines them or what they think defines them. And so, and then it perpetuates the cultural identity. So I've given up like fighting against that tide, and I just do my thing. And what's happened is I find more people are coming to my way of thinking now, which I think is spiritual. I think there is something collectively, unconsciously happening, as sort of like a wave. Not everyone, certainly not everyone, but certainly a lot of younger people are very open to this. It's just natural for them. So a lot of them, not all of them. Some of them are completely closed off, but for the ones who are open to it, it's a wonderful thing, and I'm encouraged. I'm absolutely encouraged. But I don't want to encourage magical thinking and dissociation, and you know, harming yourself by being cognitively dissonant, living in a fantasy world all the time. I don't want to encourage that. So it's a tightrope. You know, it's a tightrope because it's so easy for young people. They're so impressionable to just fall into that and join a cult and give their whole life up for a cult of personality. It's so easy to do. And there are, you know, just because you're psychic, it doesn't mean you're a good person. There are tons of psychics I know who are sociopaths and who will not hesitate to use their very real abilities to manipulate people and very vulnerable people who are hurting. So I understand why the profession gets such a bad rap, because there's so many ethically void practitioners out there. It's not even funny. And they're doing a heck of a lot better than me financially in some respects, you know, because they really are manipulating people in a bad way. And so I try to encourage people to keep an open mind, but not so open that their brains fall out, because there are so many people ready to give up. They don't want to look at themselves, so they give all their personal power over to someone who seems to have it all and know everything. And it frightens me. That's truly frightening to me. So I'm just about walking the path and being as truthful and as honest as I can, and hopefully do it in a nice way, in a way that doesn't hurt people's feelings or anything. But sometimes I just have to tell it like it is, because sometimes if somebody is, you know, falling into it, you have to yank them out. And sometimes when you yank somebody out of something, it doesn't feel good. It hurts your arm, you know? But I don't try to, I'm very fond of the Polish phrase, not my circus, not my monkeys. You know, I used to try and save everyone and run after them and be the knight in shining armor. And that's harmful too. That doesn't help anyone by saying, oh, don't do that. Don't join that. That's a cult. You know, okay, if that's your learning center, if you have to do that, it's part of your learning to understand, fine. But I'm just saying there's an easier way to do it. You don't have to give up yourself in order to learn a lesson. There's an easier way to do that. And I do think energetically that's changing somewhat. But then I see tons of people who are still falling for tons of belief systems that are no longer necessary for them. They don't need it. It's time for a new paradigm where you have to think for yourself and you have to survive in a healthy way, and not one that's codependent and reliant on the group to do it. You need a group sometimes, but you don't need it codependently. You don't need it in an unhealthy, enmeshed way that is dangerous and, quite frankly, regressive. So.
Yeah, so, you know, you're speaking about clients and people who seek your help. So, are there any clients that you're willing to share about that have, you know, kind of stood out from amongst all of your clients? You helped them. You know, what kind of, like, yeah, what kind of help have you given them?
Well, it's weird because each reading is unique. No one reading is exactly alike, although there are patterns of readings. And often what will happen, I have to give you some themes here. I'll get themes with clients throughout the month. Like each month has a theme. And I'll have like a sort of weird running thread through, sometimes through several readings in a row or a cluster of readings. And that says to me that karmically, even though these people don't know each other, they are part of a soul group that I'm a part of that are supposed to be learning these same things. Because I learn just as much from my clients as they teach me just as much as I teach them. I learned so much from my clients, and I'm so blessed and I'm so lucky. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity. But any one specific reading that would be really a standout reading, I mean, there's so many. I've done so many hundreds of readings. I can't, I mean, there were a couple that I probably can't talk about just for privacy reasons. But, I mean, there have been some where I'm weeping right alongside the client. Like, just so emotional what I'm seeing. And then they're confirming it for me. And I can't control myself emotionally sometimes. I'm like, I have to leave the room for a moment and like get the Kleenex because it's so, sometimes it's just beautiful. And sometimes it's just I'm empathically picking up on their turmoil and what they were going through. And I'm feeling their emotions as well. And it's really hard to separate. That gets enmeshed sometimes. So I have to like work really hard to just say that's their feelings. That's not mine. But in terms of like one, I mean, usually what happens is people don't need to see me more than a few times tops. I don't want people to be, again, codependently dependent on me. The whole goal is in and out. You know, I don't want to do a surface scrub. I want to get a deep cleaning. I don't want to have to see you over and over and over again. If you have to come to me more, with the exception of one client I can talk about this. This guy is in Australia. He's an Australian client. I love this kid. He is so great. And he saw me a bunch of times before he went. I recommended that he go on this is a really great story. Okay. I mean, a really great success story of a client. I'm really happy with this one. And I feel confident talking about it. I'm sure he wouldn't mind. He had a small business owner. He was a notary public. He was living a very staid life as a student in Australia. I think he was in Brisbane. Just as normal as you got. And he was saving up a lot of money to, you know, forward his career aspirations as a small business owner. But he didn't quite have an idea of what it was that he wanted for it. And I don't know how this came to be, but I think I was sort of a catalyst for telling him, I said, you need to be like in a bar dancing on a table with a transvestite and having the time of your life. He wasn't gay or anything, but I mean, he just needed more perspective is what I was getting. And he needed radical perspective. He needed to get out of himself and go where he had never gone. And I literally said something to the effect of, you need to be dancing on a table in a nightclub with a transvestite and having a ball and singing karaoke and just losing your mind, basically. In a good way, not in a...
Yeah.
You know, and you need to, like, travel the world. And I just kind of said that this was the feeling I was getting, is that he just felt trapped. He felt like life was stale. And this guy, now, I don't know if he had this in mind or not, but it gave him the confidence over the course of 6 or 7 readings. This guy transformed. And he literally took up to travel the world. He's writing a book now about how to travel the world really cheaply. And he wants to do seminars. And it's created a whole life for him. And I don't want to take full credit for this. I can't remember the specifics of this. But I know that it inspired him enough and it resonated with him enough to literally change his life 180 degrees. This guy, he has the best Facebook profile of any person you will ever see. I think he's literally been to pretty much every country except maybe Greenland. And he's been on every continent, I think, except maybe Greenland. And he's been to almost every country. And it's just a miracle. It is so astonishing, and it's so encouraging, and my heart swells every time. He's a Facebook friend as well. Every time I see where he is, he's like, I'm in Palau now. I'm in, Rwanda. I'm in here. I'm there. I'm everywhere. And it's just amazing, and the photos are amazing. So I consider him my biggest success story, because he really took it and ran with it in a way that I can confidently say no other client has done. I mean, he really literally took it to a whole other level. And I'm so proud of him. And he is so confident. Not that he wasn't super confident before, but he had some confidence issues. And he just blossomed. And I just got to watch him blossom, and it was incredible. And he's so funny, and he's such a joy, and I love him. And he came to New York on one of his travels, and we hung out, and we went to a comedy club, and it was fantastic. It was so fun to meet him in person finally. We had a blast.
So why, if you don't mind sharing, why did he come to you initially?
I think he was looking for guidance. Like, he was a little trepidatious about what he really wanted. And I helped him over the course of those sessions to explore what it is that he wanted. And what he wanted was so unconventional. I mean, in a sense, it's pretty conventional. A lot of people want to be adventurers and travel the world, right? But how many people actually do it?
Right.
And as fearlessly as he did. And I know that I'm not the only person who was helping him with coaching and everything. He's really good. He sought out some really cool coaches and help. And I think I even might have recommended other coaching, not specific names or anything, but just types of coaching that he took to like a duck to water. And all of the advice was correct, and it worked, and it was fantastic. And it changed his life for the better. So, it takes a village. It wasn't just me, but certainly I know that those conversations were germane to him taking the leap, gaining the confidence, seeing the world from a different perspective, and relying on himself and his intuition, trusting his intuition enough to take that leap. It's one thing to climb up to the high dive of the swimming pool and look down. It's another thing entirely to actually jump in and take the leap. So he did that. And it was beautiful. It was a magnificent thing. And now he's like writing a book on the subject, and he's going to do really well. And I'm so proud of him.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know. I didn't know that when my two other teammates and I came up with this research topic, I didn't know how loaded all of this would be. It's great. So I actually have just one more question.
Yeah.
You talked about how your family, you came from a family of lawyers and doctors and, all those professions. So how did your profession as a psychic, did it affect your relationship with your family and friends at all, if you're willing to share?
Yeah, it did. And for some, for the better, and for most, for the worse. I mean, it really was something people could not handle for the most part. It really, it's kind of like the equivalent. I'm not really helping myself here with this comparison, but it kind of felt like having your normal relationship with your family. Everything's calm, cool, collected, and then 2 weeks later, walking in and saying I killed someone. It's that level of, it changes you and it changes the people around you. It's at that level. I mean, I might as well have said my head exploded and hundreds of thousands of animals flew out of my brain, and I have a zoo in my home. And I mean, it just sounds insane to people in that position who are not accustomed to that, who consider themselves secularists, secular humanists, atheists. One family member, who shall remain nameless, posted on Facebook that I was mentally ill and that I needed help. Everyone started treating me like I was the crazy aunt in the attic. And I have had to make the painful but helpful, ultimately, decision to sort of disconnect from those family members. And that, in turn, on my journey of learning, helped me realize the dysfunction in my household that was less than nurturing and less than helpful. And it forced me, in sort of a dark night of the soul, to recognize, like, oh, this is who they really always thought I was. it turned out to be that the psychic thing was sort of like an excuse, but that they didn't really love me to begin with. That it wasn't really love and support to begin with. It wasn't a very loving and supportive environment. And it was a lot of, my way or the highway kind of thinking, like very controlling belief systems. And some of those people are just not in my life right now. And that's fine. I don't miss them. I don't miss them. Good riddance, better luck elsewhere. Because I have found that my true friends really are my true friends. And the true people who are in my life who really love me are the ones who really stick around and are worth it, So the quality versus the quantity changes. That ratio definitely changes. I think I chose on a spiritual level to really examine like what that means as well. So this polarizing profession that I'm in, I mean, some people view psychologists that way. I mean, it's the 21st century, but some people view coaching that way. It's like you don't have to be psychic to be in a healing profession to be met with a lot of polarizing reactions from people and patronization. And I know tons of coaches who get flack as well just because people think, oh, it's so silly to be a life coach. Until you need one. They're not all the same. Some are really great and some are not so great. Just like doctors, just like lawyers, just like teachers, just like any profession. There's corrupt cops, there's really good cops, So, in all, I think we need to stop throwing the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to any kind of profession. Because there's benefits to be had from them, and it depends on the practitioner a lot of the time. And if they're a good match.
Right. Okay, thank you so much. Do you have, anything more you want to say?
I just want to thank you for that opportunity, and I hope it helps. I'm really fascinated by how you guys. I was wondering, how did you guys come up with this topic specifically? Was it something that was chosen for you by the teacher, or was it?
No, not at all. So basically, we went to class on first day of semester, and our professor was like, "We're gonna do an oral history project," and at that point, nobody really knew exactly what an oral history project was, but she described it as something that hearing the true stories of people that are often, that are sometimes misunderstood or they're just not heard of at all.
Marginalized. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
We're doing a project on nuns of color in New York City.
Interesting.
Right, and we have first generation Muslim, woman in STEM, and so we were trying to think of something, and our professor wanted us to do a really sexy topic. It's something that you need to find incredibly sexy because you're going to be working on this for the whole semester.
Oh man, that's funny.
And so we were, among our topics, we had, psychics, retired geishas. We had just really interesting
That's
things.
so cool.
Yeah.
I love that I'm in the company of retired geishas. I love that.
Yeah, I know. It would have been amazing, but I think retired geishas. We kind of knew that it would be really hard to do anyway.
That's great.
All three of us just genuinely wanted to know because we just didn't know, and we just. And another topic was North Korean refugees, but we had a lot of historical accounts on that, but psychics we just didn't know, and so we wanted to hear.
Well, I'm really happy if I was of any help whatsoever, and that's an amazing class, it sounds like, and I'm kind of envious. I wish I could sit in on that, because that sounds like a really cool course. And, well, thank you so much. This was very enlightening for me to see what the public thinks about this kind of stuff, or sort of that they're interested in that at all is kind of endearing to me and kind of encouraging. So, right on.
Your story, everything, it was so, it was cool. I don't know, it was just so cool. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate this. I hope you do really well on the project and you get a AAA.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
my gosh. Well, enjoy your day. I mean, I hope it's still beautiful
Uh,
out there. Yeah, maybe we'll come across each other in person sometime later
yeah,
down
that's great. If you need any follow-up questions or anything, just shoot me an email. I'll be happy to help out if I can.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome so much. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.